I don't know how long you're supposed to or allowed to say Happy New Year, but since it's our first Church Pew Sports episode of the new year, we're going to say it. And if we get fined and somehow suspended for it, we'll live with that. Happy New Year, everybody. It's good to have you with us. Thank you for listening, for hopefully subscribing and sharing the link with other sports fans in your world. And a quick reminder at the very outset that not only can you listen to the podcast on all the podcast platforms, but we do have a YouTube channel where we're putting up the video, for better or for worse. We're putting up the video of every episode that we do. Bill Hobson here. Pastor Paul Miller joins us from some new digs in Minneapolis. Looking pretty sharp there. How are you?
I am doing well. This is our new apartment up here in the Twin Cities. Bill, in honor of 2025, I turned over a new leaf and I sat down on the couch about an hour ago and I thought, I have an hour to kill. What am I going to do? The NBA is on. So I turned on the pregame for OKC versus Cleveland, who apparently are two of the best teams in the league right now. Didn't know that. And I made it through the pregame and about 2 minutes into the game, and I flipped over to the Big Ten because Indiana was playing USC, and that was more interesting to me. But I tried. It's like a New Year's resolution that lasts like a day.
I was just going to ask if that was some intentional decision that you made to start off the new year. And by the way, if you made it through the ESPN pregame show, you did pretty well. Now, TNT, nobody can turn that one off, but ESPN's got some pregame issues.
They do. They don't have Charles, so they're a little boring.
Not yet.
And not yet. We'll see.
Well,
but Michigan is kicking it in 2025. Like the state of Michigan is undefeated for the new year or some crazy thing like that. Yes.
Yeah. David Collins is joining us on the podcast, thankfully, to kick off the new year. David, could you give us a quick rundown of what Michigan-based teams are doing in the new year?
Yeah, since 2025 started, the Pistons are 4-0 and have a 10-point lead late in the third tonight, so they could be 5-0. The Wings are 5-0. The Lions are 1-0. Michigan basketball is 2-0 after that win against USC last night.
UCLA.
And, of course, Michigan football beat Alabama and are also 1-0 in the new year.
Now, that was technically New Year's Eve, but I'm going to let it count.
You're going to let it count.
I think
That's right.
And tonight on the podcast, we're going to focus largely on what's happening in both professional and professional football, that being the NFL and college football, both levels professional. But we do have another member of our panel with us back again, a big Vikings guy, a huge J.J. McCarthy guy, which endears him, of course, to myself and to David in some ways. Alex Rauch joins us again. And Alex, I'm going to let you set your title for everybody. So what does Alex do when he's not talking sports?
What does Alex do when he's not talking sports? Well, he's playing with his two boys who are 3 and 1.5. And the last two nights, while mom and dad were out of the room before bedtime, they took every single book off the bookshelf and put them into the pack and play, and every single toy out of the toy bin into the pack and play. So there was a 15-minute pack and play cleanup before we had any bedtime tonight. So
Nice.
that is what I currently do.
Yeah. Do they learn that rebellious behavior from mom or dad? That's the question.
Yeah, it's definitely a mom thing, but you know.
My question was actually more geared towards your professional life, but I do appreciate the insight into the kids' book transference process.
Yeah, I work with Paul at the ESA National Office, coordinating a ministry called Gateway, which is a theology training ministry that launches cohorts around the nation.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Well, good to have you with us again. Happy New Year. And let's get into it. Let's start at the NFL level. The Lions are on a bit of a magical run. I understand that there are other teams involved in this world of ours. We can talk about Paul's Bears. We can talk about what's happening in the rest of the playoff brackets. David, I want to start with you because this magical run continues. All the injuries in the world. Everybody who's ever worn a Lions jersey has somehow been at the hospital at some point this season, and yet they continue to keep on rolling. So you're the guy who has studied, written, fought, prayed, cried, yelled, and celebrated over these Lions over the years. Are you surprised they're still this strong and that they beat Minnesota as handily as they did?
No, I mean, I'm not surprised. Ultimately, the roster construction from the beginning of the season has been, if they were fully healthy, I don't think it would be close who the best team in the NFL is. It's taken all of this to even give them a run for their money. The reality is the culture and the coaching is so outstanding that every time you give a true challenge to them, that's when they step up to their best to the best form of football. I know going into that game, like everyone on ESPN picked the Vikings to win. All these different people. I remember Colin Cowherd had this whole thing where he went off about, the Lions need this more because they're not going to, the style of play isn't going to travel as well. And I sat there and was like, but they're 8-0 on the road this season. I don't understand. I don't understand this logic. Um, no, I looked at that and said it was an unbelievable game. I think the Vikings are right there on the level with them. Darnold, this is the thing that scares you if you're a Vikings fan, is if Darnold plays a Darnold type game, which he did against the Lions. But the reality is, coming into Detroit and assuming you're gonna impose your will, that's like this team has gone from, to me, the biggest laughing stock in all of sports and somehow has transformed into a thing I don't worry about anymore. Even if we had lost that game and had to go on the road in the playoffs, I wouldn't worry. Like, we may not win the Super Bowl, but you're going to get the kind of effort that you want to see from a team that could win the Super Bowl. And it seems like they're going to be able to pull that off just about every game because the coaching is on another level. And I just, yeah, it's been a super surprise. I think the last couple years have been surprising, but this year it seems like this is who we are now. And it's weird for me to say that.
Yeah, and I got to check in with our Vikings fan. Alex, you were as invested in that game as any of us were as Lions fans. So from the perspective of a Minneapolis guy, as you watched the first half, by the way, absolutely no reason that Minnesota wasn't leading by at least 10 points heading into halftime, but they weren't. Absolutely no reason they kicked the ball out of bounds with 20 seconds to go, knowing, I'm sure it wasn't on purpose, but then the Lions instantly turned that into 3 points. And all of a sudden, you've got this feeling like, wow, they just missed a golden opportunity. What's it like in Viking country?
The way that I would describe how I feel about my season and the Vikings in general is I double checked before. This is the first season ever that the Vikings have won 14 games and we didn't win our division.
Yeah.
It doesn't get more brutal to that as a fan, like leading into playoffs. We exceeded every expectation. And then when we exceeded expectations, we exceeded those expectations. And then we played like we weren't even a football team in the biggest game of the season, still had 14 wins, and we don't walk away with the division with that. So that's how Viking country feels right now.
So for you, was the performance by Sam Darnold against the Lions a bigger surprise than the performance of Sam Darnold the entire season was a big surprise for the rest of the league? I don't think anybody thought he had in him a near MVP level of talent to lead this team. So which was the more surprising Sam for you?
I'd say MVP level Sam still takes over for the surprise category. Just you never saw it. You got 10 games into the season, you're like, well, when's he gonna crack? And then he doesn't crack and he keeps going. And then he 110% cracks against the Lions, which was surprising, sure. But yeah, the MVP level play is overall more surprising for me.
Yeah. Well, Paul, you're kind of new to that town, but you've been traveling, and I think I remember you texting me that you were with some Minnesota fans in various terminals, airports, and things like that. What are you picking up vibe-wise? And then we'll talk more about the rest of the NFL picture.
Yeah, it's Alex, correct me if I'm wrong. It's not quite the intensity level of how the lunatic fringe of Ohio State fans can turn on Ryan Day because they have a bad regular season finale. But the debate around Sam Darnold and what do they do with him is what I'm hearing from everybody. We were talking about it in the office. yesterday and today. Does this one game mean that they need to move on from him? They got JJ waiting over here. Looks like he's probably going to be ready to go next year. So do they trade JJ? Do they trade Darnold? Do they not re-sign Darnold and risk losing him for nothing? Do they trade JJ for a draft pick? They probably could. They were talking about who was it? Cowherd today was talking about how JJ would have been a top 5 pick if he had come out in this year's draft, and he would have been the first quarterback to go. So the Vikings probably could get a top 5, top 10 pick for him. Is that what they should do? And then, like, more level-headed fans, I think, like my friend Alex, would say, what they should do is re-sign Darnold and not let him walk for nothing. And then they should see how next season plays out. And eventually JJ is going to be the guy, but maybe not right away. That's the level-headed thing. But so I'm hearing from both sides of the Vikings fans about what their perception is of Sam Darnold. It's good to know that there is a lunatic fringe in most fan bases, so I don't feel so alone in that. But that's the debate, wouldn't you say, Alex? Like that seems to be the two camps that guys are in, and it's not like they've lost in the playoffs yet. They still have a playoff run in front of them. And so maybe it depends on how Darnold performs in the playoffs. Maybe that's the hinge point of this whole thing.
Alex, let me ask this too. With Darnold's contract, is this his last year technically on the contract?
Yeah, it was a 1-year, $10 million
Okay,
deal.
so then the third option, and this can lead into other quarterback conversation down the road, like with Brock Purdy, et cetera. Why not franchise him? Give him the one more year and see where it goes from there. I think that's probably the smartest option.
Yeah, I think the underlying storyline in Vikings country has been this very, very slow. Okay, Darnold's pretty good. Week 10, you're starting to say like, do we re-sign him? You get to week 13, 14, 15, and most people are kind of like, you can't let him walk. He's playing so well, you can't let him walk. And then my first question to my friend group after we lost the game to the Lions was, does this change your opinion about Darnold for next season? And it was fractured in the way that Paul described, where we had all been on kind of the same train. Like you can't let Darnold walk. It all of a sudden, just one game was enough to rupture that for me and some of my other buddies, but others are still full on Darnold train.
Man, it's so weird. We often in the entire universe of professional sports, I think NFL quarterback is considered to be the hardest position to play. I think that's kind of widely recognized. And this is a really good example of that. In that game against the Lions, Darnold missed a number of receivers that were open. He was under pressure. Whenever they made him roll to his left, he was very inaccurate. And the Lions clearly had a strategy to make him roll to his left, which was great. And he would spin out of there and have no chance at anything. At the same time, the guy led them to 14 wins on a team that thought it had a different starter coming out of training camp. I mean, this is a pretty impressive performance by a guy who, because of one game lost, by the way, he didn't just lose to the Jaguars. He didn't just lose to a team that's, looking for the first draft pick next year. He lost to a really good team that, yes, was missing basically anybody we've ever met on defense. And they put together a remarkable effort to pressure him, and it worked. You could make a case. I'm not trying to defend Sam Darnold. I got no skin in that game. You could make a case that it was the offensive line of the Vikings that really failed the assignment in that game. He had no time to throw. I don't think he threw a pick. Did he throw a pick, David?
He didn't throw a pick, but I just want to interject here because this is the issue with that game. In that game, their main issue was that they were 1 for 8 or whatever it was in red zone opportunities. And if you go look, 3 of those opportunities, he had a wide open guy on his first read with time and didn't make the throw. There was one where Jordan Addison did a cut in, was wide open, and you can see him staring at Addison, and he turns back and goes deep to Jefferson and overthrows it. There's another time where Addison, his first read, came in and cut back to the corner of the end zone. He was looking at him, pulled the ball away, and spun out and tried to run left and made another bad throw. This is the thing with Sam Darnold. You watch his tape most of the season, he's been excellent, but you watch his tape during that game, and it's like this was the old New York Jets, like seeing ghosts. Sam Darnold was that game. And so that's the thing with Darnold is he good enough to be consistently good for your team to be consistently good? I think he is. He's the number one pick for a reason. But is he good enough to not have those moments? Because what I think you saw in that game is the way that they'll eventually lose in the playoffs. And I'm not saying that, again, I said they're practically on the same exact level as the Lions. Like, there's not much that separates them. Like, but there's also other factors you have to bring in. So, for instance, one of the coaching candidates that people want is Brian Flores, and Brian Flores' defense is unbelievable. Brian Flores' defense has given up 7 games of 30-plus points in the last 2 seasons. 4 of them were to Ben Johnson. So there's also other aspects of what happened in that game because they weren't stopping Jahmyr Gibbs from doing whatever he wanted. So I don't think you could put it all on Darnold, but if you're somebody that watches film and watches some tape, like, you have to look at it and say, there are some significant things you must actually kind of be a little bit worried about. But at the same time, if you have him on a good roster, I think you can have yourself a season of 10, 12, 13 wins pretty regularly, because I think that Minnesota roster is very good.
And most years that would win your division
Oh, yeah.
easily.
I think what's difficult about it too is the narrative that Vikings country tries to overcome is that we can't win big games.
Mhm.
Every single time Kirk Cousins was on Sunday Night Football, Monday Night
Yep.
Football, it was always, can Kirk win big games? We get to where we're playing the Seahawks when Blair misses that field goal in the playoffs. We just seem to always lose it in the moment that we need it the most. So for Sam to have a truly incredible, great quarterback play all season, and then he fails in the biggest moment of the season, you're just straight back to that. Can't win big games here in Minnesota. So I don't know.
Meanwhile, in Detroit, and we'll get off the lines here in just a moment, but I've got to just play a quick soundbite because as frustrated as Vikings fans are with Sam Darnold's performance, Lions fans continue to chant Jared Goff's name at the grocery store. I mean, it's crazy everywhere you go. At the Pistons game a couple nights ago, at the Red Wings, it's everywhere. These random chants just break out of Jared Goff. Post game, after the Vikings game, he comes on. Whoever had the game, he comes on with them. ESPN had the game. So he comes on, I'm sorry, NBC had the game. He
NBC.
comes on to the post-game set. I think by this time it was over on Peacock, so about 3 people saw it. But they asked him about his relationship with Dan Campbell. This was such a cool answer.
I get to see you and Coach Campbell and that relationship that you have. How has pairing with him impacted your life?
He's been incredible. He's you're gonna make me sorry. He's been incredible. He's breathed life into me from the moment I got here, and it's been a lot of fun to win with him and to have a guy like that believe not only in me but believe in the whole team. At every point of this journey over the last 4 years, he's believed in us, and it's been fun to play for him.
Hey, Paul,
That's
how
cool.
often are you hearing a quarterback say something like he's breathed life into me and get emotional talking about his head coach? I did not hear Caleb Williams say that much this season about Matt Eberflus.
No.
When you see that chemistry and that relationship, what as a football guy, what does that do for you?
It reminds me of Ditka when Ditka was Ditka for the Bears. Like, I never really thought that Ditka was this genius coach, but man, did he build a culture, and man, did the guys want to play for him, right? And all that kind of stuff. And it feels the same way for me with Dan Campbell. Like, we see the lot. Well, I don't see him as much anymore because I'm not in the Detroit market, but the locker room speeches and everything else that pop on social media and on the news and everything else. And I'm just like, well, give me some pads. I want to go play for that guy, right? And I think that's so important when every team is talented, and the margins between a roster like Detroit's versus Minnesota's A lot of it is belief and culture and all those things that are create the tipping point and everything else, So here's my $1 million question. I'm going to ask on behalf of my friend Alex. I'm going to ask you guys, you Lions fans, guys, who do you want to see win the Vikings? Is it the Rams? The Vikings Rams game. Would you rather see Minnesota back in Detroit in a couple weeks, or would you just as soon they go away?
Well, and David will correct me if I'm wrong, I think we actually end up getting the lowest possible seed remaining, which could very well be Washington.
That's
Right.
correct. Yeah.
But Alex and I were talking before we started to record tonight that with this entire wildfire thing happening in LA, I'm interested to see if the game is in any way impacted schedule-wise, air quality-wise, if they have it there, or if they suddenly announce this game's going to happen in Minnesota.
Yeah.
The
The
league's not
NFL
gonna
already
miss a
released a
game.
statement on that.
What was
So
that?
it wouldn't be in Minnesota, but they would move it to someplace safer, close to the stadium. I read the statement, but I don't remember where they said they'd play it.
They
But
picked
they
Arizona.
wouldn't. Yeah, I think it was Arizona. That's right. They wouldn't give Minnesota a home game.
So, D, in answer to Paul's question, who's your preferred opponent for Detroit in 2 weeks?
Well, I mean, if you're a Dan Campbell guy like I am, you just say I want to play anybody, anytime, anywhere. But if I had to choose, I'd like to see Washington.
Right. Right.
Because to me, I don't. Washington is very porous against the run. Like I think Bucky Irving's going to have himself a game. But if we wound up with them the way that we can run the ball and potentially getting David Montgomery back for that game, I just think that matchup works well for us.
So Alex, curious from your football fan observation standpoint, which number one seed is the greater, the more dominant team? Who's more likely to continue through this whole thing, knowing that Super Bowls, by the way, rarely end up with the 1 seed versus the 1 seed. But between Detroit and Kansas City, which team do you think has a better shot at all of this?
It's a good question because in general, it is so hard for me to deny Kansas City with how they've done it. Every year, we keep saying that Kansas City can't do it with this roster, and then they dominate. They win games, it feels like, without trying to win games because they know they don't have to put in all of the effort. They're saving their effort for the end. That's how it feels when I watch Kansas City. Whereas at the same time, Detroit, I think, would absolutely give them a run for their money because unlike KC, they are 110% every single play, and it's infectious in so many ways.
Paul, how do you balance that scale, Detroit, KC, as the 1 seed?
I would actually lean towards Detroit because I got to believe that some of their defensive players are coming back. And at some point, Kansas City, it's like this smoke and mirrors thing, like you're alluding to, Alex. At some point, it's gotta turn. And I do believe Detroit is a bit of a team with destiny on their side right now. And so I'd lean towards the Lions, but I'm not like strong enough to argue the point. That's just kind of my opinion, I think.
David, the old boxing deal is that to beat the champ, you got to knock out the champ. You seem to have some KC concerns?
No, it's not even KC concerns. It's KC reality. They're inevitable. They consistently show up in playoff time. They can consistently win until that happens. Like, and even if it wasn't the Lions, if we were talking about another team that just had a season like the Lions, if you're asking me to lean one way or the other until you handle that thing, I'm not sure it can be handled. And Andy Reid seems to be handling everything the correct way. They've gotten slowly better over the last few weeks of the season. Their offense is starting to click a little more. Hollywood Brown's back. Like things are starting to work for them. And like the only other problem that they have is you got Baltimore and Buffalo in that conference.
Yeah.
And that's, and you can say that the Lions have Minnesota and Philly, but if you're asking me, like Buffalo and Baltimore versus Minnesota and Philly, I'm leaning Baltimore Buffalo that whole way because those quarterbacks are different.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But the problem is the most different quarterback happens to play for that team in Kansas City. Like that's just the reality.
Yeah, that's a
Hmm.
good point. Tickets right now on the StubHub World for the first Lions playoff game in 2 weeks are starting at in nosebleed seats that are mounted just under the moon are going for over 620. And then you make your way down, and the prices go up. So, question for all three of you. If somebody were to hand you third level seats for the game, would you take those or prefer to watch at home? Alex, for your team, it doesn't have to be for the Lions, but if the Vikings had a home game and the seats were that expensive and they offered them to you, would you prefer to be in the stadium or at home?
Yeah, I'd go to the stadium. Yeah, especially US Bank, it rocking environment, very fun to be there. Playoffs, win or go home. I'd love to be right in the action.
Paul, what are you doing?
I would probably go to the game, but it would be tempting to sell the tickets and then spend all that money on food and watch it at home. That
David?
I'm taking the tickets, I'm selling them for as much as I can get them for, and I'm watching with my cousins and my dad at his place because we have been in this ride together for so long
Yeah.
that I want to share it with them.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I cannot remember if I shared this on our season finale, so forgive me if I have, but my wife and I went to the Bills Lions game using the season tickets of our friends who have them, friends from Vegas who have them. They're in the third level, in the corner of the end zone, and you're unable to identify with your own eye who's who on the field. You're way, way up there. You end up watching it on the scoreboard. I'm not exaggerating. I'm not making this up. The guy, one row ahead of us, one person to my right, throughout the game, his body would shake and then he would just stand and scream. And it was not a great environment. I just didn't enjoy it. And midway through the first quarter of a great game, by the way, midway through the first quarter, I said to my wife, I would much rather be at home. Part of
was he
that.
at least cheering for the Lions?
Oh yeah, he had a Lions hard hat on. He had the big chain link thing with the big Lions logo, and he would stand up, which he did 50 times. He would stand up and mule kick his seat. You know how the seat flips up? He would mule kick that as loud and as hard as he could. I don't know how the seat is still in one piece. So, anyways,
Really funny.
we got those tickets. I was very grateful for them. We got them for $100, and walk-in price on the street for those was $450. And midway through the first, I was like, why didn't I sell those tickets and buy the snacks and all that stuff? So I would definitely be at home. Let's go to college football. Is anybody in this group jump in surprised by the final four teams that are left?
I am not.
You're not.
I'm not. And that's because I listened to my new favorite podcast, The Kings of the North. And those guys on that podcast were talking about how the best teams, this was going into the CFP, were talking about the four best teams in the playoff, the 12-team field were Ohio State, Oregon, Notre Dame, and Penn State. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, could that be true? And it has turned out, I think, to play out that way, right? So I'm not at all surprised. I'm loving it because I have a number of friends from my days down in the South that are not returning my text messages right now, and so that's kind of fun. So I'm not surprised. I should take that back. The one thing I am surprised about is that Ohio State was able to turn around after such a train wreck of a regular season finale. But I'm thrilled, of course. But besides that, I'm not surprised.
They look unstoppable to me. David, are they the best team in the Final Four, the Buckeyes?
I said in the podcast at the beginning of the season, I thought they were going to win. I thought all year they were the best team in football. I still think that. I think the loss against Michigan motivated them. I still thought they were, like, we had a podcast after that game, and I said, I still think Ohio's going to win that. I think they're going to win it. I think eventually talent, the thing with Michigan is a mental thing. It's not a talent thing. They were better than us as far as talent goes this season. What they finally did was realize, hey, we have the best wide receiver college football has seen in some time. Let's just give him the ball. And I remember the entire game against Michigan. I'm like, they're just trying to run it up the middle at Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham. Like, what are they doing? Just the one drive right before half, they threw the entire time. Here's Abuka. Here's Jeremiah Smith. Like, and then just walked down the field and scored. It just was. It's such a weird psychological thing that no, I still think that they were going to come out and be their best, and they came out and were their best, and I think they're going to win it. My only issue is that, like, one of three teams that I really dislike is probably going to win this thing,
Right.
unless Texas manages to pull off an upset. But we'll see what happens. I truly, I'm not surprised because, of course, the year after Michigan wins it, that's going to be the setup at the end. It's going to be Ohio versus Penn State or Ohio versus Notre Dame, and I'm just going to have to live with it. But I'm all right with it because we did our thing when we needed to do our thing.
Huh. Alex, are you at all kind of surprised by the Big Ten's dominance in all of this play? I mean, the SEC, it just matters more at the SEC. We're told that's the literal slogan that they put on things. And the SEC has folded like a house of cards in this postseason. Does the Big Ten dominance surprise you at all?
All of my college football opinions I get through whispers from Paul Miller. So
He's the college whisperer.
it does not surprise me because I didn't know what to expect.
Yeah. It is kind of fun though, Paul, isn't it? I mean, it's dominance. There's no other word for it.
Yeah, I think Ohio State has the highest ceiling by far, and they've just got to believe and work through whatever the demons were for them. But man, they're playing great.
Yeah, they really are.
They're playing great.
And the conference has two teams in the Final Four. You can say what you want to about Penn State, but they're there, and that's the reality of it. Quick question for you guys. Really, I think because most of the games have been blowouts. We've had one good game. One good game. Texas, Arizona State. And in that one game was enough controversy to last us for a very long time and probably lead to some sort of change to rules and replay and the way that things are at least analyzed and evaluated when it comes to targeting. So on the big hit, David Collins, was it targeting?
I feel like they call that. To me, it felt like more of a face mask to fade. It wasn't like an intentional lead with the crown of the helmet. But how many times do you see that called? This is why for years the NFL and college football, they've tried to litigate what penalties are with lawyer speak, like what a catch is and all these things. Because what was happening was there was too much subjectivity within the rules for these refs. And now they're trying to throw in, eye in the sky stuff, all these things. I don't know. Like in the moment, regular speed, it sure looked like it. In the slow mode replays, to me, it was truly 50-50 whether or not that should have been the call. So I'm okay with how it went. It's just, yeah, it just kind of stinks because you would have liked to see the other result, in my opinion.
Yeah. Paul, do you think it was targeting?
Yes, I can give you a one-word answer to that question because the way the rule is written is if it's a defenseless receiver, then intent doesn't matter and what part of the body you hit the person with doesn't matter. All that matters is if you hit him to the neck or the head, it's targeting. And it felt like it was, I don't think he launched or lifted up, and he hit with his face mask more than anything, but he hit him in the head. So yes, it was targeting. I think the reason they didn't call it is because it happened at a time in the game where it would have most likely changed the outcome of the game. Like if that play had happened in the first quarter, it's targeting. no doubt. And that guy's kicked out. And we were talking about it, about how what the NCAA really needs is who was it that was saying, okay, there should be a 5 and a 15 and an ejection. There should be gradations of the targeting penalty, where if it's like an unintentional thing like that, maybe you could maybe argue that was okay, that's a 5-yard penalty and an automatic first down.
Yeah.
Right. But if it's an actual, like, you targeted the guy, now you get the 15-yard penalty. And if there's like intent to injure, you get kicked out and the whole deal and everything else. But that's not how the rule is written right now. So by the way the rule is supposed to be applied, I think it's really hard to dispute that it should have been called targeting.
I was in a text thread with some other guys, and I was standing my ground, like that is not targeting. It was face mask to face mask. And then on the broadcast, they would bring in their official analyst.
Yeah.
He was like, targeting, absolutely. And then you'd see on social media other officials chiming in, that was absolutely targeting, absolute targeting. So I'm kind of confused. I'm mostly confused about the definition of a defenseless receiver.
Yeah.
In that case, that kid still had his hands on the ball. So if I'm a safety, my job is to remove the ball from the receiver's possession and any chance of him catching. I understand you can't go to the head, but I've always been confused by defenseless receiver. I understand the blindside hits. I understand that when the pass has sailed 12 yards over his head, you got to lay off. You got to somehow stop after you're running 22 miles per hour and somehow veer directions in midair. But David, could you define a defenseless receiver for me in this context? Because that part I don't get.
Yeah, I mean, defenseless receiver to me is somebody who is their body is in a position in an attempt to catch the ball where they cannot in any way defend or protect themselves. Like like if you're diving backwards for a ball and you reach back all the way and you're midair, like, and a guy just comes and blasts you, you're completely defenseless because your body could fly any way. You could land on your head, you could snap your neck. There's all these different things. So that to me is what a defenseless receiver is. If a guy catches the ball, gets 2 feet down and has a chance to start to tuck or something like that, he's no longer defenseless because he can actually make some kind of move in that situation. I think, again, though, it's a subjective call whether or not a guy is truly defenseless in the moment that he makes a play. But these things sometimes are so bang bang that it's not until you slow it down
Yeah,
to
right.
the millisecond whether or not you can even tell, did he hit him with the crown or with the top of his helmet or the face mask or it's like, and this was my contention for years, is that every play that is replayed should have to be watched in normal speed.
Yep.
You can replay it all you want, but it's got to be normal speed. And unless something stands out in normal speed, then it's not clear and obvious what did or didn't happen. And that's just always been my contention.
Yeah. Here's my other thing too, right? Like, I'm pretty sure that the ref gets called over and he looks at the monitor and he makes the call. I wish they would like go to somebody who's up in a booth somewhere or in New York or whatever, and
Like they do in other sports.
yeah, somebody who's not going to be influenced by the emotion of the game and get caught up in that. And like I said before, I think because of when it happened and how it would potentially affect the outcome, I think that was why the ref swallowed his whistle a little bit on it. But if it was somebody who was not emotionally attached at all, just looking at the play itself and going, okay, by the definition, what is it? Then I think you have a better chance at getting a good call. But it's always going to be so subjective, especially if they start talking about intent and did that guy really have a chance to defend himself, like you were talking about, David, and all that other stuff. That's all always going to be subject to the discretion of the refs.
Yep.
But
okay, I'm going to imbue upon each of us the title of college football commissioner. Something that's actually really needed in this world. So, Alex is a commissioner. David, you can be commissioner. Paul, commissioner. I can be commissioner. When we look at the overall structure of the 12-team college football playoffs, would you leave it exactly like it was done this year? Or are there changes that you would make as commissioner / czar who could just bang the gavel and this is how it's going to happen moving forward? Alex, I'll let you go first. Would you change anything?
I should go last because I know the least
All right, we'll let
about
you go
college
last.
football.
Paul Miller, would you change anything?
For sure, I would. If it's going to remain a 12-team playoff, I would eliminate the automatic buys. Like I'm okay with. I'm actually okay with teams like the Big 12 champ, Arizona State, and some of those teams getting in. I just don't think they should have been seeded third or fourth, and then you end up with a scenario where Oregon has the toughest, as the top seed. Oregon has the toughest path, and that kind of thing. That's unfair. So if it was going to stay 12 teams, that's what I would do. But if I could do anything, I would probably make it a 16-team playoff and just have 8 first-round games, home games for the top 8 seeds. And that to me was the big win from the playoff this year, was those home environments were just awesome.
Yeah.
They were just killer. And so it kind of proved out that having a bye is not an advantage. So eliminate the buys, have a number of teams in there to where nobody gets a bye. And then you would have 8 killer first round playoff games. And then you go into your bowl season from there and et cetera. That's what I would do.
And as we currently sit here, the top 4 seeds didn't get a home game, but those ranked under them did. So, David,
and the top 4 seeds all are out.
Yeah, right. Yeah. David, what would you do?
Well, the funny thing is every team with a bye lost.
Yeah.
I agree with Paul on one
We're
part.
taking finals. That's why.
Yeah, I agree with Paul on one part and disagree on another part. One, if we had to keep it 12, I agree, get rid of the bye. Well, no, I wouldn't get rid of the bye. I would give the bye to the top 4 seeds.
Yeah.
Period. Like, there's no reason that, teams that aren't in, like, if you're the 3 seed, you should get a bye. If you're the 4 seed, you should get a bye. You shouldn't be going on the road as a 3 and 4 seed. You've earned your spot. That to me is ridiculous. But what I would do is I'd go the opposite of Paul. I wouldn't go to 16 teams. I'd go to 8 teams. Because I just don't think that there are enough good teams and good games that are in the 12, 13, 14, 15 seed teams. And so to me, you go 8 teams, you got your 4 games right there. They're home games, and then you've got your next set of games are your major bowl games, and you can play some of those other games on those bowl sites as well. So I just don't.
Yeah.
I think we needed more than 4. Honestly, my original contention was that we should have 6. 6 to me was kind of perfect, but after 12, I'm willing to slide down to 8. That's kind of where I sit on that.
6 is tough because you get into odd numbers after the first games are played.
Yeah, or 7, I guess would be, and then the number 1 seed gets a bye.
Yeah, and the same is the case with 12. So, Paul made the money symbol. That's exactly.
Well, yeah, of course.
Exactly right.
They're not going to go less playoff teams at this point. Let's just all be honest.
For sure. I would echo what Paul said. I think 16 teams, 1 through 8 get a home game, and you're off and running. It would be, I know this is silly, but it would be kind of nice if in some way those early games could benefit some of the bowl games that are about to just disappear. And that's okay if they disappear. I mean, there are some bowl games we don't need. But I paid careful attention this bowl season to the wide stadium shots of some of those bowl games. Folks, you've seen more fans in the stands at a 5th grade flag football game than you have at some of these games. And remember that the schools are required to buy X number of tickets. It won't be long before schools just decline those invitations. It's just not worth it.
Yeah.
Why would you, your donors are already ponying up for things like NIL and all that stuff. They're not going to buy tickets to the Poulan Weed Eater Bowl, and it's just not worth it. So, all right. So we have 4 commissioners here. That worked out pretty well. Alex, do you want to add anything now that you've heard, or do you want to just kind of remain in that ambassador role on behalf of JJ McCarthy?
In the opinion on college football playoffs that I've developed in the last 4.5 minutes, I personally am anti-bye. I'm not really big on bye weeks. You can just go play. I do think that top seeds should have a home game. So I don't know if I'd weigh in on 16 teams versus 8 teams, but I'd say no bye. Best seeds get home games.
I like it. And by the way, might I just suggest that maybe 1 fewer regular season game to save these kids from playing an NFL season?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're still in this thing, you're playing an incredibly long season in between, wink, wink, studying for your finals.
Yeah. We all laugh and
Time
just
to blow off some steam. Get
Yes.
it off your chest. Rant about what's most bothering you. I got a lot of problems with you people. Now you're going to hear about it. It's time for Holy Discontent.
All right, we get to blow off some steam about something that might be a little irritating to you. David, you got anything?
Yeah, mine's kind of tame, but it's Chris Ilitch, especially when it comes to the Tigers. You've seen what's happened with the Red Wings. They've been putting on a little bit of a show lately, but it's just very frustrating to me that you have clearly the best pitcher in all of baseball, and you're going to try to work through arbitration, and you have control over him for another year or two. But we were promised that money was going to be spent on this team. And I know we're still in the Bregman sweepstakes. And I forget the guy's name from New York, but I liked that signing at second base. I just felt like after what this team overachieved and did last year, that they were actually going to put money into it and try to go get a couple guys that could come make plays for us. So yeah, that's frustrating. But on the positive note, the Pistons did win. Michigan teams are still undefeated
in 2024.
in the year of 2025.
You'll be happy to know, David, that the Illiches are spending some money because they're renovating the space behind home plate to put more ground level suites in place. So that's where the money's going.
You know what? I totally take back what I said.
Nothing builds champions more than upscale VIP seating behind home plate. It'll have a whole new look. Alex, anything bothering you?
My holy discontent this week is Chris Collinsworth. I just think he's the most biased commentator that I've heard. He has an inability to say something positive about the Vikings, and this goes far beyond the game that we just watched. Almost every single time I watch Chris Collinsworth, all I hear about is Aaron Rodgers or Patrick Mahomes and not the people on the field. So that is my holy discontent.
That's very fair. Paul, what's on your mind?
Well said.
Speaking of announcers.
Yeah, my holy discontent is with Herbie. Kirk Herbstreit, who just can't get out of his own way and can't help himself. The more he tries to explain away his obvious biases, the worse he sounds. He was on Twitter today talking about how he doesn't really have a Twitter account. He was on Pat McAfee talking about that. He's like, I don't really have a Twitter account. My kid does it for me. So then 2 hours after that show airs, his Twitter account is posting all these things about the fire victims in California and stuff like that, and how he's praying for them, and everyone's commenting going, thank you, Kirk's son, all this other stuff. But there was just, I think we have the clip, right, of him trying to defend the fact that ESPN doesn't actually have SEC bias. This actually cracks me up.
We could not have paid for a better Final Four with Notre Dame and Ohio State and Penn State and Texas. The only one missing is Michigan. You could somehow wedge Michigan in. So like this idea that we want Alabama and Texas A&M and Auburn, and are you kidding me? Like if you're asking us who we would want, we'll take Ohio State every year, Notre Dame. Like this is a ratings bonanza. So if you're going to accuse us of anything, you should accuse us of wanting Ohio State, wanting Notre Dame, and these big brands. If you knew anything about ratings, that's who you want.
Okay, Kirk, it's not a ratings question, buddy. You're missing the point. ESPN is fine with that top four because they are blue bloods, but that wasn't what you were raging about. You were raging about teams like Indiana and SMU and Arizona State and Boise State. And you were talking about how SEC teams were more deserving. That was the problem. And let me remind you that ESPN has a contract with the SEC. So if you really want to just look at the numbers, at the money, the more you can pump up the SEC, the more money is in the bank for ESPN. We all know that. So don't try to hide behind the fact that Notre Dame and Ohio State have huge fan bases. That's not the question. That's not what you've been saying all along. And I think he would do himself a service if he would really just shut down his social media and not. Just not. Or at least maybe until the playoffs over. Yeah.
Outsource it to his son. And by the way, for any remaining Alabama fans who are still livid that they didn't get into the 12-team playoff, you lost to Michigan, who had like 11 yards of total offense. So
Yeah.
just give it up. My holy discontent actually took place last evening. We are recording this Wednesday night. On Tuesday night, the Michigan Wolverines basketball team went into Pauley Pavilion at UCLA, the home of John Wooden, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and one of the most storied programs in college basketball history. And they put a curb stomping on the UCLA Bruins. That's not, I mean, it's not as shocking as, there are upsets that happen. There are things that happen. This Michigan team's pretty good. The UCLA coach, Mick Cronin, post-game, I don't know if he's looking to get fired. I don't know if he wants all of his players to enter the portal tomorrow morning, but this was his answer post-game after being routed by the Wolverines.
I mean, I don't need to do anything else. I almost got 500 wins. I'm only 53. I mean, it's a joke. It's a joke. But yet I come in and I have more passion and energy and pride than everybody in. That's the problem. So what the truth of it is, Ben, it's really hard to coach people that are delusional. The hungry dog gets the bone. We got guys that think they're way better than they are. They're nice kids. They're completely delusional about who they are.
My holy discontent is, Coach, how dare you? David, how about you're a player in that locker room? What's your next step? What's your reaction after that happens?
The only thing I'm thinking is, hey, he said I was a nice kid. I mean, are you kidding me? How in the world can you, as a college organization, have a guy who goes into that press conference and says, I'm great and do everything right, and everyone, my coaches, my assistant coaches, my trainers, my players, everybody else is doing everything wrong, but me, I am so good and great and have done all the things right.
Oh, man.
Like, we talked about Dan Campbell and building a culture. That's culture building. Guess who's responsible for how those players are, their work ethic and how they're practicing and how the coaches are responding and who's being held accountable? Guess who's responsible for that? Mick, it's you, bud. You're not doing everything wonderfully, or else this wouldn't be happening. I cannot grasp how you do not fire that man now.
I think you don't because of his buyout, unless you have like some clause in there that says, hey, if you're a complete tool, then maybe we can fire you for cause and not give you any money, right? Something like that. He's stumping to get fired. That's what he's doing.
Seems like it.
That's probably what it is.
Yeah.
When I first saw the quote, I had to double check to make sure it was Mick Cronin and not Mark Driscoll. Okay, time for that guy.
Right now, this minute, today, this week.
We'll take a moment to shout out and tip the cap to somebody who's doing it right and kind of in a positive way. So, Paul, you've got one, I've got one, and then if you guys have one, let us know. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, so mine it's like tangentially from the world of sports this week. I'm talking about Joe Rogan, right? And the fact that yesterday on his podcast, he had Wesley Huff, who's a Christian apologist, on. And I think we have a quote, like Joe Rogan's not a believer, right? But man, does he seem to be wide open to the conversation. And it's just a fascinating journey that he has been willing to go on. So if you have 3 hours and 15 minutes to spare,
They are long.
I'd encourage you to listen to that long form conversation between the two of them. But I think we have a little clip of Joe Rogan talking with Wesley Huff.
I know a lot of Christians are hardcore Christians. They're some of the nicest people you'll ever meet in your life. So it does work, right? Like if you do live like a Christian and you do follow the principles of Christ, you will have a richer, more love-filled life. So it is true, right? But you have to submit to this concept that this guy was the child of God who came down to earth, let himself be crucified, came back from the dead, explained a bunch of stuff for people, and then said, all right, see you when I come back.
That's so great.
Good.
The guy with the biggest podcast in the world is like seeking on microphone. He's trying to figure it out. And I just think it's fascinating and I'm here for it. So
Really cool. and a great conversation. By the way, we try to keep Church Pew Sports to right around an hour. Cannot imagine if we went to 3 hours, how many people would stay with us to the end, but Rogan's got the formula down, so it's pretty cool. Alex, you have that guy?
That guy is the future quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings. His name is JJ McCarthy, who, despite nothing going the way that he thought it was going to this season, every week is tweeting out about how much he loves his team, how much he loves Sam Darnold, how much he loves KOC, the culture there. Way to keep your head up, kid, as you have a bum knee unexpected and you're still cheering on your team.
Yeah, and a fantastic head of hair, I must say.
Napoleon Dynamite-ish. Yeah.
Really. David, that guy.
I don't really have one, but I just want to say this. That guy is the state of Michigan sports, updated after the Pistons win tonight. Pistons are 5-0, Wings are 5-0, Lions 1-0, Michigan basketball 2-0 since the start of 2025. Michigan sports right now are that guy.
I like that, and you should put together a pure Michigan campaign centered around all of that. That guy literally has nothing to do with sports. For some odd reason, this made me laugh harder than anything I've seen maybe in the last month. And it's just a kid telling his dad a joke on Instagram or wherever I saw it. And it's so pure, and his dad's laugh is so good. Just here's the joke. And this is that guy. This kid, I don't know his name. I don't know his dad's name, but this is that guy.
Hey, Dad.
Yeah.
Well, they're probably going to get a note sent home from school.
Why? What happened?
Well, I was standing in line to get my food in the cafeteria, and I see a big bowl of apples. And there's a note in front of the apples that said, "Only take one, God is watching." So I go farther down the line, and I see a big bowl of cookies. And I decided to write my own note. And it said, "Take all you want, God's watching the apples."
It's really funny.
I don't know why that got me so much. That was just fantastic. All right, let's wrap it up with the 3-minute message.
Homer, I'd like you to remember Matthew 7:26. The foolish man who built his house on sand.
And you remember Matthew 21:17.
And he left them and went out of the city into Bethany, and he lodged there.
Yeah. Think about it.
Think about it. Okay, so today I was just thinking about Romans 1:16, for I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes. And we have a ready-made example of someone who is not ashamed of the gospel. It's Boise State head football coach Spencer Danielson. And I believe the clip we have is from him, like in his pre-game, one of his press conferences before they played Penn State, I think it was. And, Boise, the team that didn't belong because it should have been an SEC team in there instead of them. I just love Spencer Danielson's directness. And so take a listen to this.
I talk about 3 things: love Jesus, work hard, treat people right. Doesn't mean I do those all the time. That's who I want to be and something I focus on. And so my relationship with Jesus is the only way I can be everything I need to be for this team. And I believe in a lot of different verses that I hold true to. I believe in Revelation, it talks about doors God opens, no man can shut. And I believe that because there's so many things that can create anxiety in your heart. Like, oh no, is this going to happen? Hey, if God wants it to happen, doors God opens, no man can shut. Ephesians 3:20, God will do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think. When we win the Mountain West Conference Championship, we get a bye in the playoff and play in the Fiesta Bowl. That was a moment for me where something that I believed God on, I stood on. That happens. That God will do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think. And I think so many times for me in my faith, you look at stories in the Bible that directly correlate to what we are going through in our daily lives. And that's what I lean on, not on my own thoughts or my own things that I want to do. I lean on those things. And that's what is my rock. That is what my faith is put on. And I talk to our team a lot about those things. I talk to our team about David. I talk to our team about Joshua. I talking about these certain moments, like it even says in Ruth, have you been called to this kingdom for such a time as this? I believe I've been called to Boise State football for such a time as this. I believe our team has too.
For I am not ashamed of the gospel. And none of what he just said is lessened by the fact that they didn't win their first playoff game, right? Like we tonight, or on this conversation, we've talked about culture. We've talked about like coaches you would play for. Like I would play for that guy, right? I would run through a brick wall for a coach like that because he's would be injecting purpose into my life that goes beyond getting a win or a loss in a football game. So well done, Spencer Danielson. And I just want us all to take that challenge with us into our week. We all are going to have opportunities this week to not be ashamed of the gospel. And I would just encourage all of us to, when we see them, lean in and not be ashamed.
Very good. This is fun, guys. Thanks for being part of it and getting the new year. This is the new season of Church Pew Sports as well. So we hope you'll join us on our website at churchpewsports.com. You can get us on Facebook, get us on X, and of course the YouTube channel as well. Alex and David, thanks so much. Good to see you guys.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be on.
By the time we talk next, David, I think the state of Michigan will be a cumulative like 21-0 probably next week in all categories. So
yeah, I mean, until a thing happens, it's not going to happen. And since we haven't lost, we won't lose. I mean, that's just science.
I like that. That is science. Take that science to the bank, friends, and we will see you all next time on Church Pew Sports.